as crystal, and looking at all matters through this transparent medium, she sometimes saw truths so profound that other people laughed at them as nonsense and absurdity. But now kind Mr. Lindsey had entered the garden, breaking away from his two children, who still sent their shrill voices after him, beseeching him to let the snow-child stay and enjoy herself in the cold west wind. As he approached, the snowbirds took to flight. The little white damsel also fled backward, shaking her head, as if to say, "Pray do not touch me," and roguishly, as it appeared, leading him through the deepest of the snow. Once the good man stumbled and floundered down upon his face, so that, gathering himself up again, with the snow sticking to his rough pilot-cloth sack, he looked as white and wintry as a snow image of the largest size. Some of the neighbors, meanwhile, seeing him from their windows, wondered what could possess poor Mr. Lindsey to be running about his garden in pursuit of a snowdrift which the west wind was driving hither and thither. At length, after a vast deal of trouble, he chased the little stranger into a corner where she could not possibly escape him. His wife had been looking on, and, it being nearly twilight, was wonder-struck to observe how the snow-child gleamed and sparkled, and how she seemed to shed a glow all round about her. And when driven into the corner, she positively glistened like a star. It was a frosty kind of brightness, too, like that of an icicle in the moonlight. The wife thought it strange that good Mr. Lindsey should see nothing remarkable in the snow-child's appearance. "Come, you odd little thing," cried the honest man, seizing her by the hand. "I have caught you at last, and will make you comfortable in spite of yourself. We will put a nice warm pair of worsted stockings on your frozen little feet, and you shall have a good thick shawl to wrap yourself in. Your poor white nose, I am afraid, is actually frostbitten. But we will make it all right. Come along in." And so, with a most benevolent smile on his sagacious visage, all purple as it was with the cold, this very well-meaning gentleman took the snow-child by the hand and led her towards the house. She followed him, droopingly and reluctant, for all the glow and sparkle was gone out of her figure, and whereas just before she had resembled a bright, frosty, star-gemmed evening, with a crimson gleam on the cold horizon, she now looked as dull and languid as a thaw. As kind Mr. Lindsey led her up the steps of the door, Violet and Peony looked into his face, their eyes full of tears which froze before they could run down their cheeks, and again entreated him not to bring the snow image into the house. "Not bring her in!" exclaimed the kind-hearted man. "Why, you are crazy, my little Violet! Quite crazy, my small Peony! She's so cold already that her hand has almost frozen mine, in spite of my thick gloves. Would you have her freeze to death?" His wife, as he came up the steps, had been taking another long, earnest, almost awe-stricken gaze at the little white stranger. She hardly knew whether it was a dream or not, but she could not help fancying that she saw the delicate print of Violet's fingers on the child's neck. It looked just as if, while Violet was shaping out the image, she had given it a gentle pat with her hand, and had neglected to smooth the impression quite away. "After all, husband," said the mother, recurring to her idea that the angels would be as much delighted to play with Violet and Peony as she herself was, "after all, she does look strangely like a snow image. I do believe she is made of snow." A puff of the west wind blew against the snow-child, and again she sparkled like a star. "Snow!" repeated good Mr. Lindsey, drawing the reluctant guest over his hospitable threshold. "No wonder she looks like snow. She's half frozen, poor little thing. But a good fire will put everything to rights." Without further talk, and always with the same best intentions, this highly benevolent and common-sensible individual led the little white damsel, drooping, 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 more and more out of the frosty air and into his comfortable parlor. A Heidenberg stove, filled to the brim with intensely burning anthracite, was sending a bright gleam through the isinglass of its iron door, and causing the vase of water on its top to fume and bubble with excitement. A warm, sultry smell was diffused throughout the room. A thermometer on the wall farthest from the stove stood at 80 degrees. The parlor was hung with red curtains and covered with a red carpet, and looked just as warm as it felt. The difference betwixt the atmosphere here and the cold, wintry twilight out of doors was like stepping at once from Nova Zembla to the hottest part of India, or from the North Pole into an oven. Oh, this was a fine place for the little white stranger. The common-sensible man placed the snow child on the hearth-rug, right in front of the hissing and fuming stove. "Now she will be comfortable," cried Mr. Lindsey, rubbing his hands and looking about him with the pleasantest smile you ever saw. "Make yourself at home, my child." Sad and drooping, looked the little white maiden as she stood on the hearth-rug with the hot blast of the stove striking through her like a pestilence. Once she threw a glance wistfully toward the windows, and caught a glimpse, through its red curtains, of the snow-covered roofs, and the stars glimmering frostily, and all the delicious intensity of the cold night. The bleak wind rattled the window-panes as if it were summoning her to come forth, but there stood the snow-child, drooping, before the hot stove. But the common-sensible man saw nothing amiss. "Come, wife," said he, "let her have a pair of thick stockings and a woolen shawl or blanket directly, and tell Dora to give her some warm supper as soon as the milk boils. You, Violet and Peony, amuse your little friend. She's out of spirits, you see, at finding herself in a strange place. For my part, I will go around among the neighbors and find out where she belongs." The mother, meanwhile, had gone in search of the shawl and stockings, for her own view of the matter, however subtle and delicate, had given way, as it always did, to the stubborn materialism of her husband. Without heeding the remonstrances of his two children, who still kept murmuring that their little snow-sister did not love the warmth, good Mr. Lindsey took his departure, shutting the parlor door carefully behind him. Turning up the collar of his sack over his ears, he emerged from the house, and had barely reached the street gate when he was recalled by the screams of Violet and Peony and the rapping of a thimbled finger against the parlor window. "Husband! Husband!" cried his wife, showing her horror-stricken face through the window-panes. "There is no need of going for the child's parents." "We told you so, father!" screamed Violet and Peony as he re-entered the parlor. "You would bring her in, and now our poor, dear, beautiful little snow-sister is thawed." And their own sweet little faces were already dissolved in tears, so that their father, seeing what strange things occasionally happen in this everyday world, felt not a little anxious lest his children might be going to thaw too. In the utmost perplexity, he demanded an explanation of his wife. She could only reply that, being summoned to the parlor by the cries of Violet and Peony, she found no trace of the little white maiden, unless it were the remains of a heap of snow, which, while she was gazing at it, melted quite away upon the hearth-rug. "And there you see all that is left of it," added she, pointing to a pool of water in front of the stove. "Yes, father," said Violet, looking reproachfully at him through her tears. "There is all that is left of our dear little snow-sister." "Naughty father!" cried Peony, stamping his foot, and, I shudder to say, shaking his little fist at the common-sensible man. "We told you how it would be. What for did you bring her in?" And the Heidenberg stove, through the isinglass of its door, seemed to glare at good Mr. Lindsey like a red-eyed demon triumphing in the mischief which it had done. This, you will observe, was one of those rare cases which yet will occasionally happen, where common sense finds itself at fault. The remarkable story of the snow image, though to that sagacious class of people to whom good Mr. Lindsey belongs it may seem but a childish affair, is nevertheless capable